morning and welcome to what I think is one of the most exciting conferences I've spoken at in recent times. What I'd like to do with you this morning, the next half hour, 40 minutes, is to share the story of the Breast Cancer Research Center and to demonstrate that once you're a physician, your obligations don't end just with taking care of patients. And so the story that I share with you, along with some personal vignettes at the end of the presentation, I hope will inspire you. I actually started off going over the statistics of breast cancer in the United States. And in 2008, almost 250,000 women would be diagnosed with breast cancer, and about 50,000 women will die, which translates into this sobering slide, which shows that every 15 minutes, 5 new women are diagnosed with breast cancer in the United States, and every 12 minutes, a woman in this country dies from the disease. Worldwide, the problem is a little bit more serious. We're looking at about 1.3 million women who will develop the disease this year, with about 500,000 deaths, and that's probably a very, very gross underestimate, because third world countries don't have good reporting systems. So we know that probably this is a very conservative number. And the real tragic thing in third world countries is that women who present with breast cancer, not like the women in the United States who come in with stage 1, stage 2, very curable disease, but they usually have much more advanced disease. They don't seek medical help until they're much more advanced, and therefore their prognosis is much worse. It's also scary to look at statistics from the National Cancer Institute, which demonstrates by the year 2017, which is not very far away, that number of women will be diagnosed in the United States will double. And the reason for that is the baby boomers in the United States are moving into that age group where they will be more susceptible to getting breast cancer. Now, that being said, in my practice, unfortunately, I'm seeing a younger and younger subset of women in their 20s and 30s who are also getting breast cancer. And unfortunately, in those ladies, the disease is much more aggressive due to the hormonal activities of the body, and their prognosis is much worse. Well, let me just tell you something. I've been practicing for about 30 years, and I've taken care of probably 5,000 to 6,000 women with breast cancer. And the fact of the matter is that the mortality rate, the death rate from breast cancer in the United States has not changed significantly in the last 50 years, which means that if you're diagnosed with breast cancer today, the chance of dying from that disease are almost the same as they were 50 years ago. Now, you will live longer, your quality of life will be better, but the chance of ultimately dying from the disease has not really changed that much. And part of the reason for that is that research is extremely expensive and it's very slow to produce results. In 1996, the American Cancer Society was able to garner about $10 million for breast cancer research. And of course, they have colon cancer and kidney cancer and lung cancer, et cetera, to also deal with, so they've got to spread their monies around. The National Cancer Institute was able to garner about $400 million. But the real fact is this, is that, as I mentioned, research is getting more and more expensive, and as you can see, in the 1970s, almost 60% of all fundings or studies that were put forth for funding actually got the funding, and that number has dropped steadily over the years to the point now where in the 2000s, early 2000s, only 1 out of 5 studies received funding, which is a very scary thing, because that means 4 out of 5 studies did not get the funding that they needed. And the real question is, what if in one of those 4 out of 5 studies that didn't get funding is that little piece of information that is so crucial to finding a cure for this disease? So about 10 years ago, I was preparing a lecture for the American Cancer Society on the history of breast cancer surgery, which in and of itself is a fascinating story, and it traces all the way back into the Egyptian times, about 4000 BC. And if you really want to find the history of breast cancer surgery, you can't look at medical books, you have to go through art history books, because that's where all the secrets about what's happened over the years is to be found. Well, as I mentioned, I've taken care of thousands of women with breast cancer, and I was frustrated with the fact that advances were very slow in coming. And so when I was preparing this talk, I decided it would be great if there was a stamp for breast cancer. And a few moments later, I said it would be better if we priced that stamp a little bit higher, and then you could buy that stamp, and the extra money would go into a breast cancer research fund. So I approached the United States Postal Service with the idea, and got a very, very, very quick response. response saying, no, it's not going to happen. We're not a fundraising organization. If we do it for breast cancer, we have to do it for colon cancer, kidney cancer, Alzheimer's, et cetera, et cetera. So I decided that it would take an act of Congress to get a bill which would authorize or actually force the Postal Service into issuing the stamp, and I wrote to the 50 female members in the Senate and in the House of Representatives about the idea, and I got not one response. Not one person wrote back. So that kind of angered me about my first ticket to Washington, D.C., because I wanted to go there to see why nobody was responding to the request that I put in. This was about one of about 12, 13 trips that I took back there. And the purpose was to visit the U.S. Postal Service. This is the world headquarters of the United States Postal Service in Washington, D.C. And this is Officer Knox removing me from the premises. And there were reasons for that. And that is that I was using F.A.C.S to communicate with the Postmaster General. And at that time, they were their major competitors. So I felt sorry for the little guy or girl in the blue F.A.C. shorts walking to the world headquarters delivering the F.A.C. packages to Marvin Runyon, but it did get the message across. I don't know if many of you have been to Washington, D.C. This is a very beautiful city, and there's the Capitol in the dead center, and on the sides of these, on the two sides, are all these senators and representatives hide. Now, I was doing this out of my own pocket. I didn't have any funding except my own money, and so what I had to do is every trip that I took to Washington, D.C., I had to maximize my efforts. So I had to go to as many people as I could with these trips. I bought one of these guides, which tells you where all these ladies and gentlemen hide in these huge buildings. This is Rainbow Building. And I went literally from door to door to door. And I didn't realize at the time what I was becoming. I was becoming a lobbyist. I had no clue what I was doing. But it's a very interesting thing that happened, because as I started knocking out all these doors, every one of these representatives had the letter that I wrote. They didn't take it seriously until I actually showed up in place. And as a matter of fact, they told me many times that I was probably one of the most effective lobbyists that they've ever had, because I didn't want anything. I didn't want any money for myself. I didn't want congressional lines to be redrawn so somebody could win over somebody else. I just wanted to stand for the women. Well, after a couple of trips, we were able to introduce the first bill in the House, which is H.R. 3401. We got about 89 co-sponsors. Very important number, because it's 435 representatives, so we need to get 218 to vote for a bill. And the Senate version was also introduced in that year. Now let's look at the economics that we're dealing with. In 1996, the U.S. Postal Service delivered 180 billion pieces of mail, 1/3 of which were first-class items, 32 cents. Obviously, things have been raised since that time, but I figured if half that volume were bought at 33 cents, and all we wanted was 1 penny, then we could raise about $300 million annually. There's some very, very important notations to the bill. Number one, it was totally voluntary, so you don't have to buy it. You can use a regular stamp if you wanted to. If you want to make a payments contribution with a penny or two, you can buy our stamp. And number two, it was very important too that any monies that were raised to the breast cancer initiative would not offset or allow the government to pull money out of other allocation sources, so they couldn't offset what was already planned to be given. And number three, I wanted the monies to be distributed to multiple organizations, so not just one organization had a grasp on all the money. As it turned out, in the final legislation, the NIH got 70% of the money, and the DOD got 30%. And a lot of people, when I speak around the country, you talk about the DOD, why are they getting money in the Department of Defense? Well, it's a very little secret that the DOD actually has 4 major research projects, and these are breast cancer, prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, and neurofibromatosis, and those are their 4 little pet peeves. The fascinating thing about the DOD is that the DOD is involved in imaging studies. So if we have the technology to be able to see a license plate from 150 miles above the atmosphere, then why is it that we can't put a breast within 6 to 12 inches of an imaging device and find tumors at a much earlier stage? So they have made some major inroads in imaging technologies for breast cancer, because the fact of the matter is the earlier you find breast cancer, the higher the chance for cure. I also wanted to get advocates to play a major role in where the funding monies would go.